The boots went for 60 cents. I was standing near the back of the crowd when Deb Harrow's brother-in-law held them up, good leather, ankle-high, barely worn, and called out an opening bid like they were a harness strap he had no use for. 60 cents was the winning number. I don't know who bid it. I don't know if I was angrier at the man doing the selling or at myself for not moving sooner. Her name was Clara Harrow, Clara Petch, before she married, and she was standing at the edge of what used to be her own front yard without shoes on. The ground was frosted. Late October, eastern Nebraska, and the sod had gone hard enough to crack underfoot. She wasn't crying. I'll tell you that first because it matters. 32 years old, recently widowed, and her husband's people were auctioning the contents of her marriage on a Tuesday morning, and she was not crying. She had her arms crossed and her chin level, and she was watching them move through the yard like it was a thing happening to someone else. I had known Donal Harrow, her husband, in the way you know a neighbor you never quite liked but respected enough to leave in peace. He was a year dead by then. Fever. The kind that comes fast and leaves a family stranded. They had no children, which was its own grief I didn't pretend to understand, and the land title had been in Donal's name, which meant it passed to his people, to brother Clem and Clem's wife Vera, who drove out from Council Bluffs the week of the funeral and hadn't left. Clem Harrow was not a cruel man in the way you see cruelty in men who enjoy it. He was the other kind, the kind who convinces himself that what's fair and what's legal are the same thing. He had a title. The law agreed with him, and Clara had nothing but the clothes she stood in and whatever household goods they decided weren't worth auctioning. The boots had been worth it, apparently. 60 cents. I owned the farm to the east, 140 acres of not great corn ground and a hay meadow that did well in wet years, which that year had not been. 49 years old, and I had been alone on that place for 11 years, since my wife passed. I'd gotten used to the alone. I'm not saying I'd made peace with it. I don't think I had, but I had fitted myself to the shape of it the way a man fits himself to a boot that doesn't quite suit. You stop noticing after a while, or you think you do. I watched them carry out her kitchen table. A good table, square-legged, the kind a woman cares for. Vera Harrow was directing the whole thing from the porch steps with her arms folded, calling out where to set what, which pile was auction and which pile was keeping. Clara watched the table go without speaking. That was when I walked over. I don't know exactly what I'd decided on the way across the yard. I know I hadn't planned any words. I'd been standing back there for most of an hour telling myself it wasn't my business, and then the boots went, and something in me that had been standing real quiet just sat down and refused to keep standing quiet anymore. I walked over to where she was and I said, "Get in the wagon." She looked at me. I had a wagon and a team at the road. I'd been heading to the mill before I stopped to watch, and I gestured at it with my head. That was the whole offer. She looked at the yard, at her table sitting in the auction pile, at Clem Harrow, who had noticed me now and was starting to come over wearing an expression he probably thought was reasonable. She looked back at me. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said. "I know," I said. She got in the wagon. I need to say something about the months before that, because nothing makes sense without them. My farm was, then, a working farm in a country where working farms were ordinary, and a man my age working one alone was not unusual but was noticed. People in that township knew my situation the way people in townships know each other's situations, without it being talked about directly. My wife had been Margaret Ennis before she married me, from a family in Iowa, and she died of something that started as a cough and became something worse. And after she died, I kept the farm because I didn't know what else to keep, and that was that. You don't talk about it. You feed the animals. You put the crop in. You repair what breaks. The neighbors were decent. I don't mean to speak hard of any of them, but there is a particular loneliness that belongs to a man who lives alone on land he keeps by habit rather than hope, and it is not a loneliness that company much touches. You can sit at a neighbor's table and be warm and fed and talk to and ride home afterward and feel the quiet of your own place settle back around you like weather. I had learned to not fight it. I had spoken to Clara Harrow maybe a dozen times in 3 years. Donal had not been a sociable man, and they kept to themselves. She would nod from the yard when I passed. Once, during a bad hailstorm, I had ridden over to check their barn roof, and she had come out with coffee in a tin cup, and we had stood in the doorway while the storm ran itself out. She had a steady way of being in a place, not chatty, not closed off, just present. I remember thinking, in the way you notice something and then don't think about it again, that Donal was a lucky man. When he died, I did what a neighbor does. Firewood. I brought firewood twice and left it in the yard without going to the door. It felt correct. It felt like what the distance between us required. Then Clem and Vera came, and I watched what they were doing from my side of the property line, and I kept bringing myself reasons why it wasn't my business. The law was on Clem's side. Clara was not my relation. I was not in any position to, and so on. I told myself all of it, and I believed most of it, and I stood back there in that crowd for the better part of an hour believing it, until the boots went for 60 cents and I stopped. My mother came from Indiana. She had a saying she said so often it lost its edge. A man who won't move when he sees wrong being done is just a man watching. I had been watching. The wagon seat was wide enough for two, but not wide enough to be comfortable about it. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and her feet, bare feet on October ground, tucked under her. I didn't look at her feet. I handed her the blanket from behind the seat, and she took it without comment and wrapped it around herself, and we drove. I didn't have a plan. I want to be honest about that. I am not a man who has ever done things without a plan, and I find I cannot explain from this distance why that morning was different except to say that when something in you that has been staying quiet decides to move, it doesn't ask permission. I had an empty room in my farmhouse. That was the extent of my plan. I appreciate this, she said after a while. Don't, I said. She looked at me sidelong. I mean, you don't need to, I said. It's just a room, as long as you need it. She was quiet. They had a right, she said. It wasn't defending them, it was just naming the thing. They had the law, I said. That's not always the same. She didn't answer. We drove the rest of the way without talking. The team knew the road. She slept in the small bedroom that had been my wife's sewing room and had been empty since. I moved the bolts of cloth that were still in there. I had never moved them and put down a fresh tick and hung a curtain on the window. I did these things matter-of-factly because the alternative was to make a ceremony out of it, and that would have been wrong. She needed a room. Here was a room. The first week was quiet. We worked around each other in the way of people who don't know each other's habits. She rose early, earlier than me, which I hadn't expected, and by the time I came in from morning chores there was something on the stove. She cooked the way some women cook, without fussing, just quietly solving the problem of a meal. I didn't thank her extravagantly for this. I thanked her the way I would have thanked anyone who cooked, which is to say I ate it clean and said it was good. She seemed to understand the register. Clem Harrow came by on the third day. I saw his horse from the field and I went in. He was at the door when I got there. Clara had opened it and was standing in the doorway with a dish towel in her hand. She had not let him pass the step. "Clara," he said, "I'm just seeing you're all right." "I'm all right," she said. "It's just people are talking," he said. He said it the way people say it when they want you to feel shame but don't want to be the one saying the shameful thing out loud. I came around the side of the house, and he saw me. "Ennis," he said. He called me by my last name, which told me something. "Harrow," I said. "I just came to see she was settled." "She's settled," I said. He looked at the door. He looked at me. I don't know exactly what he was reading in my face, but whatever it was made him decide not to continue whatever he'd come to continue. He nodded, short and careful, and he got back on his horse and he rode. Clara looked at me. "They'll talk," she said. "Let them." She went back inside. I stood there for a moment watching the road where he had gone, and something in my chest that had been wound tight for 3 years made a small adjustment. Not loosening, just settling into a different configuration. I should tell you what she was like, because the word widow flattens a person. Clara Petch, she went back to Petch in her own head, I noticed, though she never announced it, was a woman who paid attention to things. She noticed when a fence post had shifted. She noticed when the near horse was favoring his left foreleg 3 days before I caught it. She noticed things about the light at different hours and would sometimes say something small and exact about it. The afternoon comes sideways through that window, and then go back to whatever she was doing as if she hadn't said anything. I found I liked this. I had spent 11 years with no one to notice things alongside me, and there is a particular kind of company in a person who notices. She did not ask about my wife. I did not ask about her marriage. We were two people who had both come through something, and the details didn't need airing to make the fact of it understood between us. She found things to do. She was not a woman who needed directing. The garden, which I had let go to ruin over several seasons, she looked at for 2 days and then started quietly doing things to it. Raking out the dead, turning ground, planning in her head what would go where. She didn't ask permission. She just started working. I watched her from the fence one afternoon and felt something I didn't have a name for immediately. Something like, this is what this place was supposed to have. By the 2nd month she had mended every piece of tack in the barn, reorganized the root cellar which I had put off for 2 years, and made curtains for the kitchen window from cloth she found in that sewing room. Plain curtains, nothing ornate, but they were straight and they suited the room. I noticed them the morning she put them up and I said so, and she said, "Your wife had good taste in cloth," and that was all. Not awkward, just true. I had been feeding one stove in that house for 11 years. When she started feeding 2 herself, keeping the small stove in the sewing room going through the cold evenings, I noticed the sound of it, the different creak of floorboards, a lamp in a window I'd stopped keeping lit. These were not dramatic things. They were ordinary domestic things, and I am saying they mattered to me. The winter closed in around Christmas. We'd had a wet fall and the cold came hard in December, the kind that seals everything. I lost 2 calves in 1 week and spent the better part of 3 days with my hands too cold to work properly, keeping a 3rd one alive in the barn. Clara brought coffee out without being asked, the way she had done years before in that hailstorm, and the 2nd night she sat with me in the barn for an hour while I kept the calf warm. She didn't offer help I didn't need. She just sat on the feed barrel and was there. The calf lived. On the 4th night, when the cold broke some and I came in from the last check, she had the kettle going and 2 cups on the table, and she poured without asking, and I sat down and we were quiet together for a while. Outside, the wind had stopped. That particular prairie quiet after wind, it's its own thing, like the air is resting. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go on." "Why did you say get in the wagon?" I looked at the cup in my hand. I had thought about this. I had thought about it a good deal, in the 11 years of the sort of thinking you do alone in a field. You don't do it out loud, but you do it. "Because it was the thing to do," I said. She waited. She was patient in that way. She didn't push. She just let a silence be long enough that you understood there was room in it. "Because I'd been watching from the back of that crowd for an hour," I said, "and the boots went and I stopped watching." She was quiet for a moment. "Your wife," she said, "what was she like?" "Good," I said. "She was a very good woman, steady, quiet about it." "You must have been lonely." "I got used to it," I said, and then, "No, I didn't." She looked at me. Not the long look of a woman trying to read something complicated. The look of a woman who has heard a true thing said plainly and is receiving it. "I didn't either," she said. "The Harrow's O'Donnell was a decent man, but he was a Harrow. There's a kind of lonely in a marriage where the man beside you thinks you're part of the furniture." "You're not," I said. "No," she said, "I'm not." We finished the coffee. She washed the cups. I banked the stove for the night. It was ordinary and quiet, and it settled in me like something I hadn't known was waiting to settle. March came slow that year. The ground stayed hard into late February, which meant the plowing was going to run late, which meant everything would run late. I started making plans in my head for the spring, the way a farmer does, how the ground lay, what needed doing first, what I'd put in the east field and what I'd leave in hay. And then I noticed that these plans in my head included a kitchen garden. Included someone other than me in the accounting of the work. I noticed this. I let it be noticed, and I didn't examine it past what it was. She came out to the field the first warm morning with a cup, and she stood at the fence and watched me work the ground. We had reached the kind of ease where she didn't feel the need to be doing something to justify her presence, and I didn't feel the need to acknowledge her unless I had something to say. After a while she said, "The east corner." "What about it?" "It drains wrong. You can see it from here. The grade runs toward the fence instead of away." I looked. She was right. I had never caught it. "My father farmed," she said, by way of explanation. "I know," I said. "Donald mentioned it." She gave me a quick look. "He talked about you," she said. "Once," I said. "He said your father could read ground better than anyone he'd ever seen." She was quiet. "Then he could." We went back to the east corner together, and I showed her what I had planned, and she told me what she would do differently, and she was right about some of it, and I told her so. I am not a man who has trouble saying a woman is right. I was raised to know the difference between a fact and a pride, and it has served me. After she helped me carry the disking equipment from the shed to the field, she didn't ask if I needed help. She just took one end. That is the thing I think of when I think of her in those months, not any big moment, just that, taking one end. April. Her sister lived in Beatrice, Nebraska, 40-some miles south. She had written to her. She came to me one evening with the letter she'd received back, which she didn't usually do. She kept her correspondence to herself, which was her right. "She's inviting me," she said. I put down what I was doing. "All right." I could go. She was watching me carefully. "I have been here. I've been a burden long enough." "You fed me every morning for 6 months," I said. "You reorganized the root cellar. You mended 16 pieces of tack. You found me a drainage problem in the east corner that's probably been costing me yield for 3 years. You are not a burden." She was still watching me. "I don't know what I am," she said. "Here." I was quiet for a moment because I wanted to say what I said next correctly, and not say it wrong. "You are the person I want at this table," I said. "You are the person I want at this table in the morning and in the evening. You are the person I want to work this land with. That's what you are here." The lamp was between us on the table, and it made the light in the room warm and imperfect, and I watched her face in it. "I'm going on 50, I said. "I have got 140 acres and a farmhouse and a hay meadow and some not great corn ground. That's what I'm offering." "That's a good meadow," she said. "It is in wet years." "This looks like a wet year." "It does." She set the letter down on the table and pressed it flat with one hand. Deliberate, the way she did things. "I should write back to my sister," she said. "That's fair. I'll tell her I've found a situation." That's one word for it. She looked at me then with something in her eyes that was not soft exactly. Clara was not a soft-eyed woman, but warm and certain, and without condition. Like a woman who has looked at a thing from all sides and made up her mind, and is telling you so with her face before she tells you with words. "Frank," she said. She used my first name the way a woman uses a man's first name when it means something. "I was standing in that yard in October without my boots on." "I know." "And you said get in the wagon." "I did." "I'm in the wagon," she said. We married in the second week of May, quiet, at the county clerk's office in town, with 2 witnesses who were the clerk's wife and my neighbor Boone Pelivar, who drove over and didn't say much about it afterward because that was Boone's way. On the ride home, Clara had her good shoes on. I had bought her boots the week after she came to the farm, proper leather ones, and she had said nothing about it except to try them on and then look at me for one moment with that level gaze. And she held a small bunch of prairie flowers she had cut that morning. Not a ceremony woman, but she had cut the flowers. The town had talked. I will not pretend it didn't. Two people who knew better had asked me sideways questions in February, at the mill, and I had answered them the way I answer that kind of question, which is to look at them until they understand the conversation is finished. Clem Harrow had sent a letter in January that I read once and put in the stove. Vera Harrow had apparently told someone at church something that got back to me through 4 people, at which point it was mostly noise, and I didn't track it past the 4th person. Clara never asked what was being said. She knew she didn't ask. What I will say is this. A woman who watches you from the fence while you work, who finds your drainage problem, who brings coffee in a snowstorm, who takes the other end of the equipment without being asked, who stands in that yard in October without her boots and doesn't cry, a woman like that can sit with talk. She has sat with harder things. The summer was good. The hay meadow came in better than it had in 4 years. The corn was nothing extraordinary, but it was solid. The kitchen garden produced more tomatoes than 2 people could reasonably eat, and she put them up in glass jars that stood in rows in the root cellar like something accomplished. The east corner drained right after we regraded it in April, just as she said it would. In the evenings we sat on the porch when the weather allowed. She had a way of being still in the evening. Most people are restless at the end of a day. They fidget. They need occupation. But she would just sit and look out at the land the way a person looks at something they have decided is theirs. And after a time she would say something about what needed doing or what she'd noticed or nothing at all, and I would answer or not, and that was enough. That was exactly enough. I had been on that farm for 22 years by then. I had farmed it alone for 11. There is a version of that story where you say I was fine, I managed, the land got tended and the animals got fed and the years went by and that was its own kind of life. That version is true. I was fine. I managed. But there is also this. A man alone on a piece of ground long enough starts to believe that the ground and the alone are the same thing, that the land comes with the quiet, that the quiet is the price, that you don't get one without the other. You stop imagining different. You stop imagining that the fence line could look like something other than the edge of everything you have. What Clara gave me, what she gives me, because this story has a present tense, is not the end of the alone. It is the sense of a person in the place. A particular person who came from a yard without her boots on and saw fit to pick up the other end and stay. And the alone, after that, is just a memory of weather. A season you were in and came through and can name now from the far side of it. There is a morning I think of. Late summer before the harvest. I came in from early chores and she was at the stove and the light was coming in sideways through those curtains she'd made, the same curtains, still straight, still suited to the room, and she turned when I came in the door and she didn't say anything, just turned and looked at me, the way she does. The way she looks at a thing she has decided about. Her hair was loose. She usually had it up by that hour, but it was loose. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the small particular smell of that house in summer, which I could not name for you but which I knew, which I had always known alone and now knew differently as a thing inhabited, a thing shared. She poured a cup and set it on the table where I sit. I sat down. Outside, the corn was high in the field. The meadow past the fence was in that last gold of August before it starts going dry. And somewhere behind the barn, one of the horses made that low sound horses make at nothing. "Good morning," she said. I put my hands around the cup. "It is," I said. And it was. It was a good morning. It was a good morning in a good summer on a piece of land that was, for the first time in a long time, exactly what it was supposed to be. I looked at her and she looked at me, and neither of us said anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying. She had come off a frost-hard yard in October without her boots, and I had stopped watching from the back of the crowd. And whatever you want to call what came after that, whatever word you want to put on it, it was here, in this kitchen, in this light, at this table. Which was ours.